rainy night with raindrops furiously striking the windows of the luxury car, Victor calmly drove through the deserted city streets. He had finished his meetings and was on his way to his mansion, where silence awaited him. That was what he desired, the peace of his solitary routine. But something changed in that moment. As he turned the corner, his headlights illuminated a figure huddled by the sidewalk. It was a young woman, her hair drenched and clothes clinging to her body from the rain. She looked so small and vulnerable in the chaotic scene. Victor stopped the car, not on impulse, but because of something he felt inside, something he couldn't explain. He hesitated for a few seconds, watching the girl through the window. It could be dangerous. It could be a trap. Yet something in her eyes, even from a distance, cried out for help. Stepping out of the car, he walked slowly towards her, the rain soaking his expensive suit, but he didn't care. The girl lifted her face, surprised and perhaps a little scared by the approach of a stranger. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than he was used to. She didn't respond immediately, her eyes fixed on him, assessing his every move. Her body trembled, not just from the cold, but from a fear that was clear in her expression. Victor, on the other hand, felt something tighten in his chest, a strange sense of responsibility. "Can I help you?" He extended his hand, unsure if she would take it. That gesture, in that moment, carried a promise of safety. She hesitated, but finally, she took his hand. Victor opened the door to the mansion, revealing a world of luxury Alice could never have imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting a soft light on the immaculate marble floor. Every detail, from the artwork on the walls to the polished furniture, exuded wealth. But there was something about it all that didn't feel welcoming, a coldness that made the place seem as empty as the storm outside. Alice, wrapped in the coat he had offered her, took a few hesitant steps inside. Her eyes scanned the room, dazzled yet filled with unease. She felt out of place, like an intruder in a kingdom that didn't belong to her. Victor, sensing her discomfort, casually threw his wet coat over a leather chair. "You don't need to worry, you're safe here," he said, his voice calm, though not entirely free of the hardness that came from a lifetime of not trusting anyone. Alice just nodded, her heart still racing. The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken questions. She approached one of the massive windows, watching the rain as it streamed down the glass, feeling a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. She was safe, but couldn't shake the feeling that something else was about to happen. Victor gestured towards the hallway, leading her to a guest room, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors of the mansion. Alice followed quietly, still processing the surreal events of the night. When he opened the door to one of the guest rooms, Victor hesitated for a moment. The room was immaculate, silk sheets, heavy drapes, and a smaller chandelier glistening under the dim light. Yet despite its perfection, it felt devoid of life. "You can rest here," he murmured, before walking away with a quick nod. Alone, Alice lay down on the soft bed but found no comfort. Her eyes scanned the room as the silence of the mansion seemed amplified by the walls. She didn't know if she could trust this strange, taciturn man who had rescued her from the street, but she had nowhere else to go. Exhaustion eventually overtook her and she fell into a fragmented sleep. Meanwhile, Victor went down to his office, his mind restless. He sat in his leather chair, watching the rain continue to beat against the windows. Memories of his own lonely, affectionless childhood haunted him. He had never been the type to care for others, especially strangers. What was it about this girl that made him stop that night? Why had he brought her into his home, breaking all the walls he had built over the years? These questions lingered, without easy answers. As the night wore on, the weight of the silence grew heavier. The next morning, the stillness of the mansion was broken only by the soft clinking of cups being placed on the table. Alice appeared in the kitchen, still carrying an air of distrust, but calmer than the night before. Victor, already seated at the table, observed her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He waited for her to say something, a word that might give meaning to the strange connection they now shared. I shouldn't be here," Alice finally murmured, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I don't know why I accepted coming here, but I had nowhere else to go." Victor leaned slightly forward, keeping his tone neutral. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to. But if you need help, maybe I can—" She interrupted, her hands trembling slightly. "I was running away. Things at home got complicated." There was a weight in her words, a pain she tried to hide but couldn't mask in every syllable. He could see the suffering behind her facade. Alice chose her words carefully, as if they could hurt her all over again. "You have no idea what it's like to live in fear every day. Like something terrible is always about to happen." Victor felt the tension in the air, something that didn't just belong to her story, but to the way she was still trapped in those moments. She wasn't just running away from a place. She was fleeing from people, from a situation that had scarred her deeply. But she only offered fragments, just enough to unsettle him. "Who was this person? What exactly are you running from?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Alice looked away, biting her lip. "I just can't go back. And maybe you shouldn't get involved, it's dangerous." "You don't know me, Victor." For a moment, Victor considered her words. It was clear that what Alice carried with her was more than just fear. What he didn't know was how much this could change his own life. The days at the mansion passed in a strange routine. Alice rarely left her room, always quiet, always watchful. Victor, however, couldn't shake the growing feeling that something wasn't right. There was an uncertainty in her gestures, something that made him uneasy, as if at any moment she might disappear as suddenly as she had appeared. He began investigating discreetly. He used his contacts to gather information about Alice, trying to uncover more than what she had revealed. Who was this girl he'd found on the street that rainy night? Why did no one seem to be looking for her? Meanwhile, Alice, unaware of his investigation, seemed to slowly relax, but she always maintained an invisible barrier between them. She would smile, thank him for the food, but her eyes continued to avoid his. Victor noticed the small details, how she studied the house, the way her eyes darted to the windows as if always calculating an escape route. The tension grew with each passing day. Victor, torn between his rising suspicion and an inexplicable empathy he felt for Alice, found himself trapped in a dilemma. Should he confront her with what he knew or wait for her to trust him? And even as these doubts gnawed at him, he couldn't deny the strange impulse to protect her, as if, despite everything, Alice represented something deeper than just a lost girl. The atmosphere in the mansion was heavy with tension and expectation. In a moment of vulnerability, as they both watched the sunset through the living room window, Alice finally decided to open her heart. Her eyes, once full of fear, now glistened with the determination of someone who had faced great trauma. "I can't keep hiding this from you, Victor," she began, her voice trembling. "I was running from a relationship, a really bad one. The man I escaped from he's powerful. He controls everything around him, and by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I tried to leave, but he always found a way to bring me back." Victor felt a chill run down his spine as Alice's words sank in. He was beginning to understand the depth of what she was dealing with, and at the same time, he felt trapped. Her revelations not only exposed Alice's fragility, but also put him in a dangerous position. He had become involved in something far more complicated than he had imagined. "You're safe here, Alice," Victor said, trying to reassure her. But deep down, he knew her safety was an illusion. The powerful man Alice had escaped wouldn't give up easily, and now Victor himself could become a target. The thought of protecting Alice pulled him into a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The shadow of danger seemed to loom over them, an invisible but palpable presence. Victor found himself wondering what he should do next. He needed to act, but how could he protect someone from a man who had all the power and influence in the world? Victor's phone rang with a deep tone, breaking the tense silence of the mansion. When he looked at the screen, his heart raced. It was a call from an old associate, someone who understood how things worked in the circles of power. "Victor, I've heard rumors." The voice on the other end sounded worried. "The man your visitor is running from. He's found her." Victor felt a chill in his stomach. The gravity of the situation became frighteningly clear. He turned to Alice, who was sitting on the couch, lost in thought. Their eyes met, and he saw the fear reflected in her gaze. The instant connection they had formed was now a fragile thread on the verge of breaking. "We need to act, and fast," he said, trying to stay calm. "I can't let him find you here." Using his influence, Victor mobilized his contacts. He wasn't just a wealthy man. He had resources, power, and access to information most people could only dream of. He arranged a series of security measures, reinforced entrances to the mansion, a new alarm system, and most importantly, hired private security. But even then, the feeling that they were being watched didn't disappear. As they prepared, Victor couldn't shake the growing sense of protectiveness he felt for Alice. He had taken on the responsibility of keeping her safe, and it awakened something inside him he hadn't known existed. With every plan made, every precaution taken, his determination grew. He was willing to do whatever it took to protect her. "Don't worry, Alice. You're safe here with me," he reassured her, though he knew the real battle was still to come. Danger was lurking, and the uncertainty of what would happen next hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Victor paced through the mansion, his hands buried in the pockets of his suit jacket, his mind restless. As he organized the plans to protect Alice, a new worry crept in. What was the real reason behind his help? He wanted to believe he was acting out of altruism, that his desire to protect her was pure, but a part of him questioned that narrative. Looking out the window, he watched the rain trickle down, a reflection of the turmoil inside him. Was this connection between them something deeper? The way Alice looked at him, the vulnerability in her eyes? He felt drawn to her, and it made him uneasy. He knew he was treading dangerous ground, both emotionally and physically. "Who am I really helping?" he thought, the doubt spreading like a shadow over his heart. He tried to distance himself from Alice, searching for clarity in his mind. He spent the days avoiding the soft touch of her hands or the way her smile lit up the room. It was hard to ignore the intensity growing between them, and the thought that he might be putting both of them at risk consumed him. Victor felt torn. On one hand, there was a genuine desire to protect Alice. On the other, an inner voice warned him that this bond could become an emotional trap. He needed space to understand his feelings, but the idea of leaving her alone made him even more anxious. The internal conflict gnawed at him, and each passing day he wondered if he was truly helping or if he was, in fact, losing himself. Alice sat on the veranda, the soft glow of the setting sun bathing her face as she gazed at the horizon. Victor approached, sensing the tension in the air. He knew something had changed in the past few days, but he couldn't quite pinpoint what. Alice seemed more determined, but also more vulnerable. He sat beside her, his heart racing. "Victor," she began, her voice trembling but firm. "I need to tell you something important." He looked into her eyes, realizing that this moment was crucial. "It's not just about what I'm running from. I have information that could hurt him." Her statement echoed in Victor's mind like thunder. "About who?" he asked, trying to stay calm, though the concern in his voice was undeniable. "About my stepfather," Alice continued, her expression heavy with pain and determination. "He's not just a powerful man. He's involved in things much darker than you realize, and I know how he operates, how he manipulates everyone around him. If I can speak out, it could change everything." Victor felt a knot form in his stomach. Her revelation completely changed the dynamic between them. He was dealing with something far bigger than he had anticipated, and the trust he had begun to develop for her now deepened into something more profound. "Are you asking for my trust?" he asked, surprised. "Yes," Alice whispered, her voice soft. "And a chance to start over. Together." Her request hung in the air, and Victor found himself standing at a crossroads. He felt as though he was stepping into new territory, not just in protecting Alice, but in the possibility of a shared future. And the thought both filled him with hope and left him apprehensive. Victor walked through his mansion, the walls adorned with artwork that seemed to watch him, judging his decisions. Alice's revelation still echoed in his mind, and the idea of protecting her now weighed on his shoulders like a mountain. He made his way to his office where his friends and colleagues were gathered, discussing what to do about the situation. "You can't adopt her, Victor," Daniel, his longtime friend, shouted, his voice full of concern. "This man she's running from isn't someone you want to mess with. It could ruin you." The others nodded in agreement, their worried expressions only intensifying the pressure Victor felt. He listened to them, but the image of Alice, her eyes, her fragility, the determination she had shown, wouldn't leave his mind. He knew she wasn't just a lost girl, she was someone who needed help, and for some inexplicable reason, he felt it was his responsibility. "I can't abandon her," he said, his voice firm, even though he felt a growing uncertainty within. "She needs me, and I can't ignore that." The room fell silent, Victor's words hanging in the air. He turned to face his friends, challenging them to argue against the decision he had already made in his heart. "If it means risking my life, then so be it." Victor's mansion, once a symbol of security and opulence, had now become a battleground. The afternoon light faded, casting long shadows down the corridors as he prepared for what was to come. Alice was locked in her room and he had instructed her to stay safe, but his heart pounded with the urgency to protect her. Then the silence was shattered by a loud crash. The front door splintered and a tall, imposing man radiating fury stormed inside. It was Alice's stepfather, his eyes filled with venom and threats. "Where is she?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the mansion's walls. Victor stepped between the man and the staircase leading to Alice's room, his survival instincts kicking in. "You can't be here," he said, his voice controlled, though adrenaline surged through his veins. The man advanced, and Victor quickly assessed his options. He had no weapons, only the sharp mind that had led him to success in business. "I'm not here to talk," Alice's stepfather growled, lunging toward Victor. But Victor was ready. He moved swiftly, using an old martial arts technique he had learned years ago. With one quick motion, he disarmed the man, slamming him against the wall. The fight escalated, each blow charged with rage and desperation. The tension in the air was palpable, and Victor knew the stakes were higher than he had imagined. But as he fought, his resolve only grew. He wasn't just fighting for his life, but for Alice's freedom. After the chaos of the confrontation, Victor's mansion was wrapped in an eerie silence. The scent of smoke and the distant echo of a racing heartbeat filled the air as he leaned against the wall, still trying to process what had just happened. The man who had invaded his space, who had threatened everything he held dear, was now out of the picture. But the real battle had taken place within him. Victor walked through the cold corridors of his mansion, the echoes of the fight replaying in his mind. He felt a mix of relief and exhaustion, but above all, a newfound clarity. The decision to protect Alice, a lost young woman who, like him, carried her own scars, had changed something fundamental in him. In risking his life, he had faced not just an enemy, but also his own fears of intimacy and vulnerability. He looked out the window where the sun was beginning to peek through the clouds, casting light on the mess inside the house. Victor realized that life wasn't just about power or wealth. It was about connection, understanding, and accepting that being vulnerable wasn't a sign of weakness but of strength. He had become a different man, someone capable of love and open to the world. And more importantly, he was ready to face it alongside Alice, even though the road ahead was still uncertain. The sun shone brightly, casting a golden glow over Victor and Alice's new home. They had found a small refuge in a quiet town, far from the shadows that had once threatened their lives. The change was more than just a new address, it was a declaration that the past wouldn't define who they were. Alice looked out the window, watching the trees sway gently in the wind, a symbol of renewal and growth. The fear that had once followed her had faded, replaced by a vibrant hope. She turned to Victor, who was unpacking boxes, his face reflecting a mix of determination and relief. Together, they were building something new, a space that was theirs alone. "Everything feels so different here," Alice said, her voice filled with emotion. "I feel like I can finally breathe." Victor paused for a moment and looked at her. This is just the beginning, Alice. We still have our battles, but now we'll face them together. His words carried a weight they both understood well. They had faced danger, but also the emotional challenges life had thrown at them. As they settled into a new routine, Victor suggested they transform the house into a home together. They would choose the colors, the furniture, and every little detail that reflected their personalities. Alice smiled, a genuine smile free of any shadows. The traumas they carried were part of their stories, but they no longer defined them. Every day was a new opportunity to rewrite their lives, and they were ready for that journey. Through the hardships, they had found an unexpected love, a connection that blossomed under the light of a new beginning. Did you like the story? Comment below what you thought of this story, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this.